I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He is the author of several books, no other than Mr. Paul Clark.
Hello, hi Daniel. Nice to meet you.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Paul, and can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, okay. So I'm English. I grew up in Manchester, which is quite a famous town, and now I live on the south coast of England. My parents were both teachers, and I became a teacher too, except I became a teacher of English as a foreign language. And I think probably my main motivation for doing that is I wanted to travel and see the world. And in my 20s, I lived in Italy and in Thailand, which was a great experience before coming home, settling down, having a family, etc. I ended up in language school management. And then in 2020, um, I decided to downshift and to concentrate on my writing. And a month after I gave up my job, the pandemic started. So people told me, "Oh, you gave it up at the right time, Paul. Well done." And I said,
Well,
"No, I didn't. I could have kept my job and been paid for doing nothing for a year, but never mind." Um, so I started writing seriously in about the year 2000. It was a period when I was on top of my job, my career had stalled a little bit, and I had time to write. So I wrote a semi literary thriller. Um, and eventually I got an agent who said to me, "It's a great book, but it's too long." And he said, "Don't shorten it, extend it, and make it a series." So it eventually became a trilogy. But halfway through turning the book into a trilogy, my agent unfortunately died. And round about the same time, my day job took off again, and I was too busy, so I kind of parked that book for a while. When I had a bit of time, I started writing the Omega course, and I think I probably finished it before I gave up work. I finished the first draft, but I was too busy to do anything much with it until I stopped my day job. Um, and then when I stopped my day job, I mean, I continued to work part time, but I wasn't working full time anymore. I was teaching online during the pandemic. Then I went back to my trilogy, finished the trilogy, and then I went back to the Omega course after that. So that's kind of me, and that's the history of my writing experience in a way.
so, Mr. Paul, what inspired you to become an author?
It's something I've always wanted to do, um, and I don't know if I could give a reason, but I've always, all my adult life, I've been planning books, and I spent 20 years planning them and not writing them. And eventually, when I decided to start writing, I thought, okay, let's do it properly. And I took a creative writing course. And then after that, I sat down and started to write and just carried on. And that's, I would say it's one of the most enjoyable things I've ever done. I love the writing process. I love sitting down, dreaming up characters, dreaming up plot. Um, I love, a lot of writers don't like editing. I love editing. I think it's great. And I spend a lot of time crafting sentences, crafting paragraphs, and trying to get it right. I'm not one of those writers. Anthony Burgess apparently could write the whole thing by hand, and that was it. He never went back to it. Um, Not me. I go back to it again and again and again and again to get it right, to get it to say what I wanted to say the way I wanted to say it.
What challenges have you faced in your writing career?
Writing is hard. One of the challenges I face is I get caught up in it. I get caught up in the emotion of the writing. And my wife will be able to tell, you're writing a very stressful part of your book, aren't you? And I say, yes, I am. And she says, I know, because you're very stressed. Yeah. So when I had a day job, a challenge was to detach myself from it and get on with my day job, and do that. There's a challenge of getting it right. I can remember in the second book of my trilogy, I wanted to write a chapter about a fight in a wedding. And I think I wrote 8 different versions of the chapter, and every time it didn't work, and I just couldn't get it right, and I wasn't happy with it. And in the end, I turned it into a paragraph, and it was fine. And I left it at that. So I think that's another thing. There's 2 kinds of writers, or writers, 2 extreme kinds of writers. There's the pantser, who flies by the seat of his pants and doesn't know what he or she is going to write. And there's the plotter, who spends a long time plotting their book. And I'm very much a plotter. I spend weeks and weeks and weeks plotting my book. The last book I did, the Omega course, I even plotted it on my dining table. I had a 1 meter ruler to show this book getting more and more and more stressful, and then another ruler with it coming down, and I cut up bits of paper and put them all over the desk. So I'm a plotter, but if I get an idea halfway through writing, I'll go with it. In the second book of my trilogy, I suddenly realized if I kill off this major character, that'll be a really interesting twist. So I killed that person off. Felt really bad about doing it, but in terms of the plot, I realized it was a fantastic thing to do. It really helped the plot along to do that. So I will go with new ideas when they come to me. And the great advantage of writing with a word processor is if you're writing chapter 20 and you have an idea, you can go back to chapter 3 and put that seed of that idea in chapter 3, and you can go to chapter 5 and put another seed of that idea, and then in chapter 20, wham, it comes back and hits the reader. So that's something I enjoy doing as well, very much.
Very well said, Mr. Paul. So, how would you cope up writer's block?
I read a book not long ago, a very good book by a guy called John S. Warner, which the title is something like How to Plot Your Novel, or something like that. And he said the way to get around writer's block is to plan. And if you can plan your book and you know where it's going, what's going to happen, you won't get writer's block. And I don't get writer's block. I get things that I find hard to get right. That's very much part of the writing process. But I've never sat down with a blank page and not known what to do. If I'm in trouble about a page, I'll draw a mind map of what should happen next, and then bang, I go for it. So far, it hasn't been a problem.
Oh, that's interesting. What authors or books have influence in your writing?
My favorite author, I think, is probably George Orwell. I probably read everything he's ever written, fiction and non-fiction. And what I like about Orwell, you get writers like Thomas Hardy, where the language is a character in the book. And Thomas Hardy is almost, he's a poet who's writing in prose. And the language that he writes is really, really beautiful. I can't do that. I can write good prose, but it's not, I'm nowhere near Nabokov or Thomas Hardy or someone like that. George Orwell goes for clarity. His writing is very, very clear. And that's something I admire about his writing very much. And it's something I try to do in my writing, to make it flow well, but to make it clear. Another writer I like very much is Graham Greene, who, again, I like his themes. His big theme is Catholic guilt. And I like how he works around that. I think that's always very interesting. And again, he's a writer who's very clear. The language itself is not a character in the book. The characters and the plot are the things in the book rather than the character. And I would say I aim for that in my books. I like to have good language, and sometimes I'll look at a paragraph and think, yeah, that's good, or no, I need to work on that. It's not good enough. But I'm not a poetic writer of prose.
How do you approach research for your books?
Um, I did a lot of research for this book, and research has got easier and easier and easier. When I first started writing, one of the characters in my thriller got shot, and I had to find out what it does to the human body when you get shot, because he survived. He got shot and survived. What does it do to the human body when you get shot um, from this range with this kind of gun in this part of your body? Um, and I can remember I had to go to the library and dig out medical texts in the library and photocopy them and bring them home and get used to them. And now you sit on Google and you can do an awful lot of research on Google. Don't go with what's on the first page. Sort of go deeper into Google. But I would say both of my books, both my thrillers and this book, they have involved decades of research. They've involved, in a sense, I'm writing about things that I've been interested in for decades and have been reading about long before I decided to write about them. So in that sense, and the other thing is I do quite a bit of writing about what I know. I was a language school manager and I had quite a lot of dealings with the police, which would be because our school got broken into or a student got arrested or something like that, and I would have to go and help the student, or I'd have to deal with the police, etc., etc. And having had a lot of dealings with the police makes the police part a lot easier. One of the people who read the Omega course as a beta reader, so he was reading before the final version, and he was trying to, my aim for giving it to him was to get feedback. He was a priest, and he said, this author obviously has a lot of experience with the police and juvenile courts. And I thought, well, juvenile courts, no, I haven't really got much experience. That was research. But police, yes, I have got a lot of experience with the police. So
Yes, very well said,
putting
Mr.
what you know in.
Very well said, Mr. Paul. But before we go on, I want to shout out my listeners in Thailand. You've been in Thailand, right, Mr. Paul?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, because in Bangkok I got 67% audience share. Shangwat Para
Oh,
Nakun Si Ayutha. I don't know it pronounced well,
see,
18%.
yeah.
Yes, yeah. Changwat Nantaburi, Pathum Thani, Changwat Mukdahan, Nan Phuket, and Changwat Samut Sakhon. Thank you, Thailand, for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers, authors all over the world, like Mr. Paul Clark. So, Mr. Paul, let's talk about your latest book, Omega Course.
Yeah. Okay. So for people who are watching on video rather than listening, this is the Omega. British pronunciation is Omega. So excuse me if I say Omega.
Yeah, Omega.
The Omega course. The Omega course it's a coming of age story, and it's about a young man, 17 years old, who the day after he passes his driving test, he forgets to look in his mirror as he pulls out to overtake, and he causes an accident in which another driver is killed. He's arrested and is eventually charged with causing death by careless driving, and his life falls apart. And one of the big themes of the book is how can he come to terms with what he's done? How can he forgive himself, essentially, for what he's done? Because he does accept, eventually, he does accept full responsibility for the accident. So when his life falls apart, he meets a priest, and the priest is very helpful to him. One of the things the priest says is, why don't you pray? And he says, I can't pray. I don't believe. I wish I did believe, but I don't. And so the priest suggests that he goes on the Alpha Course. I don't know if you know the Alpha Course. The Alpha Course is a kind of Christianity for beginners. and it's a part-time course that he can go on to teach him about Christianity. So eventually he joins the Alpha course, but while he's on the Alpha course, he meets a young woman called B, who's a theology student at university. Um, and she is in a crisis because her faith is crumbling. And she begins to undermine the Alpha course by giving the protagonist an Omega course. And the Omega course is essentially telling him what she has learned at university, which is all about what secular scholarship says about the origins of the Bible and the origins of Christianity. And so within the novel, there's conflict between Alpha and Omega, between what he's learning on the Alpha course and what she's telling him on the Omega course, which eventually explodes and leads to a big confrontation. So there's the conflict within him trying to get over the accident, trying to find a way to get past the accident and get on with his life. And there's the conflict within him again between Alpha and Omega. And then the other thing there's a love story in there too. There's I'd call it a kind of will they, won't they love story. So without giving you any spoilers about the ending or what happens at the end or anything like that, that's essentially what the book is about.
Yes, interesting novel, Mr. Paul. So, can you share a memorable moment when you're writing the Omega course?
Yeah, well, you mean a memorable moment in the book?
Yes.
Okay, I would say one of the most memorable moments in the book, it's quite an explosive moment, is when the people who are running the Alpha course realize that Omega B is running a parallel Omega course, which is undermining their Alpha course. And they confront B in the middle of one of the sessions. They confront her publicly and they say, "We know what you've been doing. We know that you have been sending emails to Ross, the protagonist, with all this information." And Ross and B sort of say, she hasn't done anything wrong. She's entitled to do this. And one of the leaders of the Alpha course says, "You know that Ross really needs religion." And she says, "Ross, tell her why you're here." And Ross is a bit flummoxed by this because nobody knows about his accident. He's never told B, he's never told anyone else on the Omega course, on the Alpha course, about his accident. And so he has to tell B publicly, "I'm here because I caused an accident in which somebody was killed." And this comes as a massive shock to B. And she feels really guilty for what she's been doing. Later, she's going to burst into tears. And Ross feels really bad that everybody knows his secret. And it's a major setback for him. And the leader of the Alpha course, when she's with her companions, she's going to burst into tears as well. It's a horrible moment for all three of them when it happens. I enjoyed writing it.
For sure, Mr. Paul. So, how do you balance your writing with the other aspect of your life?
Not very well. When I finish writing something, I come down to my wife and say, "Okay, you can have your husband back now." It takes over,
Mm.
It stops me sleeping. I I don't have a day job anymore, so I can spend a lot of time doing it. We try to go out every afternoon and get a bit of fresh air. We live in a small town by the sea, and there's beautiful forest near where we live and beautiful hills. And we go for a walk in the forest and go for a walk in the hills. And I have my garden I have to do, and I've got housework that I have to do, and occasionally I'll do a little bit of teaching. But yeah, it takes over.
So, what advice do you have for aspiring writers out there?
I would say learn your craft. Spend a lot of time learning your craft. I did a creative writing course, and I think I should have done more. When I look back, um, and when I first wrote the Omega course, I could see it wasn't right. It needed a lot of work on it, and I eventually decided to start again, to scrap the whole thing and start again. And before I did that, I read a number of very good books for writers. One of the best was a book by a guy called Will Storr, and it's called The Science of Storytelling. And he said it's his creative writing course, and he's put it in a book, essentially. He's a great writer, Will Storr. I love his books. And I read that, and then I read books by a guy called John S. Warner. His books are very different. Will Storr's book is a kind of inspirational book, and John S. Warner's books are ABC. This is what you do, ABC. And he teaches you how to do a 3-act plot and to have Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, with your inciting incident, your crisis point, your twist, and things like that. And I think I should have read those books a lot earlier than I did. But I read them and I worked very hard on plotting and on putting into practice what they said. The other thing that I would say to any writer is get other people to look at what you're writing and get them to criticize it. And the more they criticize it, the better. You don't want your mum to say, that's really good, pat on the head, well done. No, you want a friend who will say, I didn't like this chapter. It didn't work. You need to change this. And I've had some really good beta readers in the third book of my trilogy. It's a trilogy, but I wrote it so each one can be read without reading the others. And in the third book, I had a very big information dump that I had to get in for someone who hadn't read the other books. And I got a fantastic beta reader who, number one, pointed out the problem that my information dump was too long and boring, and number two, suggested a solution. And the solution she suggested was to chop up in terms of time, to have a bit of what's happening today and then go back, and a bit of what's happening today and then go back, and a bit of what's happening today and then go back, and do it like that. And I was very grateful to her. I mean, she was very critical, but she really helped me a lot. And then the other thing any writer has to do is get it professionally edited. The editor I got for the Omega course, I had it edited twice. And the first editor was a very good critic, and the second editor was very good at suggesting how to get past the criticisms that she had. And, it can hurt. You've put your soul into it, and someone says, you need to change it. It's not good enough. And you've got to take it on the chin and listen to what people are saying and make the changes that are necessary. So I think
Well said.
would be, if I could not repeat the mistakes I made, that would be my advice.
Very well said, Mr. Paul. So, what are some themes or topics that you're passionate about exploring in your writing?
So, in my trilogy, I think what I was exploring was the collapse of communism. So I started writing it around about 1999, 2000, so about 10 years after. And I think in Europe, the collapse of communism was the most important thing that's happened in my lifetime. It was a massive event. It was a seismic event. And I wanted to explore it in my trilogy. The first volume is about somebody living under communism, and it's about the compromises he has to make in order to have a career within a system he doesn't like at all. And so that's what I was exploring. Then the second and the third book of my trilogy are about the chaotic years afterwards, after the collapse of communism, when particularly in places like Yugoslavia and in the South Caucasus, in the former Soviet Union, things just fell apart. And it didn't lead to the flowering of peace and love and democracy. It led to chaos, and it led to states dominated by the mafia, essentially, and a very, very difficult few years. So I was trying to explore that in the second, third books of my trilogy. In my latest book, in the Omega course, I think one of the things I'm trying to explore is guilt. How do you deal with guilt? When you've done something catastrophically wrong, how do you cope with that? How do you get beyond that? And the other thing I'm exploring is religion. I'm not very religious myself. I'm not religious myself, but I've always been fascinated by religion. And something that's pleased me about the Omega course is quite a big online atheist has read it and given it very good feedback. And 2 priests have read it and given it very good feedback. And I'm really pleased that both sides have enjoyed it and given it good feedback.
Well, Mr. Paul, looking forward for those books to come. But before we go on, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our fourth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef and one of the 5-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do listen. And of course, if you are listening to our podcast, Food 101, please do visit also our Food 101 merchandise. People, we are promoting our merchandise like our men's sport one-up hoodies, pet hoodies, jigsaw puzzles, ceramic ornaments, and a lot more. So please do visit our Food 101 merchandise available on Etsy and Shopify. And speaking of merchandise, of course, I did merchandise too. I did a merchandise too for my book 101 review, people. If you are looking for, well, something like toddler short sleeve tee or unisex premium sweatshirt and a lot more, please do visit my Book 101 merchandise. So, Miss Paul, uh, what do you think the publishing industry is changing and what does that mean for authors?
I think it's a good time and a challenging time for authors at the moment. Ebooks have taken off, but they haven't taken off completely.
Mm.
I think audiobooks are taking off at the moment, and one of my aims in the next few months is to get my books onto audio. It's something I enjoy doing. I listen to a lot of podcasts. You know, when I'm doing a boring job around the house, I'll put a podcast on, or when I'm doing some gardening, I'll put a podcast on, and I think, yeah, a lot of people love listening to novels or listening to non-fiction books while they're doing other things, walking the dog or whatever. So I think that's a big opportunity for writers and a challenge um, to make sure you take advantage of this kind of change that's happening at the moment.
I'm thinking, what will be your hope for this book?
I I hope people enjoy it. That's the first thing. There's no point reading a book if you don't enjoy it. I hope it sells more than it's sold so far, and people get the word out, and that it gets going. I would say in many ways the book is a plea for tolerance on matters religious. Um, It really pleases me that a big online atheist liked it and 2 priests liked it. And if there's something I would like to say to religious people, it's that atheists are not wicked. They're just people who have a different opinion from you. And I'd like to say to atheists, Christians are not stupid. They're just people who have a different opinion from you. And you probably have more in common than you have that separates you. So I guess there's a plea for tolerance within there. Um, and also looking at people who make mistakes. There's a plea for tolerance there as well. People do make mistakes. We all make mistakes. Some of us make mistakes which have catastrophic consequences, like my character. And people have to forgive them, and they have to forgive themselves in some way.
Yes. Do you think mistake make you perfect or progress?
They do if you learn from them. And that's the key thing. I think a lot of us make the same mistakes again and again and again and fail to learn from them. Yeah, if you can sit back, look at yourself, learn from them, forgive yourself, move on, and not make the same mistake again, then you can make progress. Mistakes are part of life, aren't they?
Yes,
We all make
definitely.
mistakes, but the key thing is, can you learn from your mistakes?
Very well said, Mr. Polk. And can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Yeah. Okay. So my latest book is this one. It's the Omega Course. As I said, it's a coming of age story. Readers have said it's a heart wrenching story, that it's a character who really is in crisis. And it's a story about how he gets through that crisis. And I think it's a story that people who are interested in religion can enjoy. It doesn't matter whether they are Christian or whether they are atheist or whether they're somewhere in between. If they find religion an interesting topic and they'd like to learn more about how Christianity and how the Bible started, then I hope they would enjoy the book too. My trilogy of thrillers, they're the story of one man. And in the first book, he's an athlete and he's trying to make it onto the Soviet Olympic team without selling out to the communists, who he really doesn't like. And it tells you his story about how he tries to do it. The book is called The Price of Dreams, and it's about the price he pays to follow his dreams. One reviewer said, you can't help rooting for him. He's such a nice guy. And I remember another reviewer on Amazon said, I kept asking myself, what would I have done in that situation? How would I have acted in that situation? Then in the years after the fall of communism, he doesn't live in Russia. He lives in one of the little Soviet republics that becomes independent after the fall of the Soviet Union and immediately falls apart. And different ethnic groups are fighting each other. And he is using his celebrity status to try and stop the war, essentially. That's what the rest of the book is about, or what the second and third books are about. And one reviewer wrote that she found him an inspirational character, which I really liked. That he really is trying hard. He's making a lot of mistakes. He's not getting it right first time, but he's trying very hard to stop the war between different ethnic groups and to fight against the gangsters and the mafia who've taken over the country and to try and bring peace and democracy to his country. So, yeah, he's meant to be an inspirational hero, and a lot of people have said they've found him an inspirational hero.
Inspirational novels. Mr. Paul, and I'm inviting you next week to talk about those trilogy if you are interested.
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay, that'd be awesome. So, Mr. Paul, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
More to come, people. See you soon.